All right, Mike, you've proposed a bill that would ban local taxes on streaming services. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So under current law, local governments currently tax cable companies because they have physical infrastructure in the municipal rights-of-way. And the cable companies are then allowed to do a pass-through tax, a franchise fee, if you will, that the customers get on their bill. And basically, the cable company acts as a tax collector, and then they remit that payment to the local municipality. And that was the current intent of the statute we have on the books now. Now, there has been obviously a reduction in people, being cable subscribers and cutting the cord and moving over to the streaming platforms. And I don't think that shocks anybody. I think everyone knows that's kind of where things have moved to, although, now we have hybrids too. We have people that are cable customers and have streaming services as well. So if they are still a cable customer, they get hit with this franchise fee. And now local governments want to be able to tax streaming services the exact same way. Now, I think the important caveat to think about here is streaming services send a signal through other people's infrastructure, or sometimes there's no infrastructure in rights-of-ways, in the example of like cellular signal or satellite signals like a Starlink or a Dish Network, right? There is no infrastructure in municipal rights-of-way. The infrastructure is in space and maybe on your rooftop. And so there's no inconvenience to the municipality. There's no rights-of-way that are infringed upon, but the local governments are looking for a way to make up this revenue stream, and streaming seems to be the target for them.
And so who is ultimately paying these taxes, and roughly how much would those people see on a bill, or how much were these taxes, generally speaking?
Yeah, it's based on a percentage of your bill. So so that could vary depending on, what your total bill is. I want to say it's somewhere around like 5%. But that pass-through fee for most people is probably, anywhere from $4 to maybe $10, somewhere in that range, depending on what your bill is. But so I'm from Oakland County. So in Oakland County, the average household, it has 5 to 6 streaming services, right? So now you're going from taxing a single cable provider or a single household with cable to now a household that has 5 or 6 of these streaming services, and now they're going to incur that tax on each one of those. And I think it opens up kind of a slippery slope, right? Because the argument is, well, because the signal goes through infrastructure, they should be able to charge. I think that opens up a dangerous door for things like emails travel through the same signal. Our social media travels through the same signal. We watch TikTok reels or Facebook reels or whatnot. Those all travel through that same infrastructure. And if that argument is held true, I would hate to think that at some point we start taxing those items as well.
So it is indeed the customers who are paying that tax, and it's not being absorbed by the streaming companies.
That is correct. The current statute allows that to be a pass-through tax. So each consumer that is utilizing cable currently pays that tax. And the cable company just basically collects it, and then they give it to the local municipality that they have a franchise with. And here's something that came up in committee, and I think you'll appreciate this, Nick. And I'll throw it back at you. How many municipalities do you think are charging streaming services right now in the state?
Oh, man, I don't know. Probably not many at the moment. Probably some of the bigger ones downstate, maybe not as many up in northern Michigan.
So part of the argument from the locals is that this bill would take money away, take revenue away. Well, here's an interesting fact. There's not a single municipality in the state of Michigan that actually charges streaming services this tax. There's not a single one. This has been a nationwide push, and there's litigation all over the country right now, and the locals are losing on this issue because the courts are ruling, no, that's not what these acts were intended to do, is to charge streaming. And we actually asked for some clarification from the Michigan Public Service Commission because they're the regulators in this act. So for 19 years, they have regulated this act. They have never interpreted this as applying to streaming services. And according to their letter, they have no intention of doing so in the future unless there's judicial or legislative direction that differs from that. So their interpretation of the law is way different than what the locals are trying to push for. And again, there's not a single community that is doing this currently in the state. So, the cries from local government saying you're taking money away from us, it's just not true. It is true, and I do feel sympathetic that their revenue has reduced from the decline in cable customers. I think we all know that's an issue, and it's been an issue for quite some time. But for 19 years, this act has been around, and they're just now saying that they're reinterpreting this as meaning streaming. So I think there's a little bit of an issue there. My bill, all that does, it doesn't really change anything with the law except clarify that this is not intended for streaming services.
You said there was...
Which nobody acts on right now.
Sure. You said there was a kind of a national push. So how did this come to your attention? Was this something that you saw in the news somewhere else, or did a constituent bring this up?
Yeah, so last session this actually came up. And it's a really convoluted issue until you start really digging in. And it's kind of like that sweater with a loose thread, and you pull it and it all unravels. I feel like that's what this whole issue is. So when I started learning about this last session, I'm like, this doesn't seem right. This seems like a hidden tax on the end user. And, I'm not a guy that loves to raise taxes. So, if we're going to put a tax out to a consumer, I think the consumer needs to have a voice in that. And so right now they have no voice. And so I'm acting as their voice. The other issue is, as this came up, we heard a lot of rhetoric from both sides of the issue. I learned more about court cases going on around the country. And some of the biggest advocates here in the state of Michigan have been some of the satellite companies, right, who truly have no infrastructure in that right of way. And so as I learned about that, and then I also learned that the argument that the signal travels through internet lines and that the municipalities don't get any money for that is simply not true either. It's a different bucket of money, but these internet companies, whether it's fiber or, other types of cable, coaxial, whatever, they pay by the linear foot to the Metro Act. So there is a tax there already. It's just not collected, and it's not paid out into the same bucket that they do for cable companies.
You mentioned that, these local units of government are losing revenue because of the decline of cable, and it's really not your responsibility to find new revenue streams for local governments or, determine if they need to cut the budget or if they need to find replacements. But I'm sure that's come up in conversations. What do you argue local governments should do as they're losing this revenue source?
Sure. I think number one, some municipalities around the state offer things like, local municipal channels and things like that help get out information, or many of them are housed in some of the high schools around the state, and so it's something that helps teach people about, programming and how to run cameras or TV stations. There is some value in what they get out of this. So I am sympathetic to their revenue declining, but you're right. I think individual communities need to prioritize what services are important to their community and prioritize their budget based upon what revenue they do have. Now, is there a conversation that could happen in the future on, do we entertain some modernization act and look at, all of those different buckets of money and how are they collected? How are they spent? What can you utilize them for? And so maybe there's some things to look at there where we update kind of where we are in a society, technology-wise, and see what happens there. But, as those conversations happen, I remind people that's one topic that is not specifically what we're talking about here, right? This is something to clarify the law currently, because what I don't want, as I'm seeing what's happening across the nation, different states doing this and different municipalities, moving forward to try and do this, and then it initiates a lawsuit. I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to fund a lawsuit that we know is a poor interpretation of the law, at least in my opinion. And so I hate to see the waste in taxpayer dollars go to things like that we should know better about.
Well, speaking of monetary concerns, while I have you, how are budget negotiations going from your perspective?
It's it's always the same every year at this time of year. It becomes a pretty intensive negotiation back and forth. I'm not on appropriations, so I don't sit in the negotiating room on this, but we do get updates. And unfortunately, I think we've hit some snags with what the Senate wants to do. But again, I don't sit in the room. Maybe some of that's cleared up now. I think we have every intention of trying to accomplish this in the time frame that we need to. But I think, the Speaker, in his credit, it's we've seen instances where the other side wants to hold out for some egregious policy or some very wasteful spending, and that's just not a platform that we're willing to cave on. And if it's going to cost our taxpayers more money, I think it's worth us talking about how can we prevent the government from shutting down, which is something we don't want to happen, but we also don't want to raise taxes on the average person. Look, in the last 7.5 years, this administration went from walking into the governor's office with just over $56 billion in the budget, and now last year we were at $83 billion. I mean, that is an egregious amount of money. And what we don't want is we don't want that to continue to keep going up and up and up at the same rate that it has been. I think we need to be responsible stewards. And I think the Speaker is absolutely one of the people that wants to rein in government spending. So I think we will come to a workable agreement. I really do. And I know the Speakers are working on this daily right now. And our approach team, Ann Bolin is a fantastic approach chair, and she's been all over this. We will come to a good agreement. It's just, what does that look like time-wise? And that's, the goal is one thing, but reality is another. So we'll see where it ends up.
Final question for you. Obviously, we're approaching the midterms very quickly, and concerns from constituents become louder and louder. And so, I guess my question to you: what are the top concerns that your constituents are bringing up these days?
Well, I'm the chair of the insurance committee in the House, so I do hear a lot about insurance, and the cost of insurance, whether it be auto or health. And I think those are things that we're trying to move forward some policies that should make some serious impact to choice on the auto level and potentially reduce premiums significantly. And another thing that we're looking at is litigation reform. I mean, a lot of costs, whether it be on the retail side or insurance side or just business in general, many times comes from the environment of litigation here in the state. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Michigan got rated in the top 10 judicial hellholes in the country. And it's just, we see a lot of fraud, and we see a lot of what I think is abusive litigation. So, and that drives up costs for all of the end users. So we're looking at ways to rein that in as well, and hopefully kind of put the power back in people that are actually victimized or truly wronged in something, and take away the abuse of our legal system. I'd say those are some of the biggest issues. And property tax. Property tax I'm hearing about all the time, as well as utility bills. So, I mean, those are probably the big things in my district, and I think there's kind of that resounding feeling around the state.
We are speaking with State Representative Mike Harris, a Republican from Waterford. Mike, thank you so much for the time as always. Appreciate it.
Anytime. I appreciate you.